So today we're starting a new series called These Things I Bring, Becoming People of Authentic Relationship. And today, what I really want to do today is I just want to kind of set up the idea of, and introduce this idea to you, and help you kind of think about why it's important. You know, all of us long for really good relationships. And whether we're just talking about our friendships or our relationships with our kids or our marriages or romantic relationships, and a lot of times we're frustrated. I think you can probably relate to this. Many of you can. I have been able to in my life. Frustrated that we're not finding, enough of those great relationships that we long for. But I think there are things that impede us getting to that really authentic place with the people in our lives. And that's what this series is going to be about, is how can I see the things about me or in me that impede me getting to that really authentic place with people in my life, because we all sit back and we say, well, how come I don't have this, or how come I don't have more of this? So, and to help me kind of kick it off this morning, I'm actually going to invite my wife to come up here and sit with me for a few minutes, and she doesn't know this, and so because I was afraid, thank you, because I was afraid that she would say no, because she likes to sing up front. Because I'm afraid of you. I'm not afraid of you. I'm not afraid of you. Because she loves to sing up front. She doesn't always love it, pondering the idea of me saying, come up front and talk with me. But the other reason is because this series was her idea. And so I thought, hey, come on, this is your idea. Maybe you should be up here talking with me about it. But anyway, to make her feel great about it, why don't you put your hands together and thank her for sitting up front with me. So the reason I invited you up here to help me kind of prime the pump of thinking about authentic relationships is because this whole series was your idea. And I guess I just want to ask you, why did that come to you? Like I was saying, I'm not sure where to go with my preaching next. And you said, how about a series about authentic relationships?
What sort of fostered the idea was his sermon on Father's Day, where he was, if you guys were here or if you heard it, where he was talking about his father and how his father lived his life, and what really jumped out at me was how authentic he was as a person, and a lot of the qualities, the character traits, if you will, his ways of relating, his calmness, his humility, his joy in just being with people and relating to people and seeing them thrive, and that could be, children that were 2 years old to, people his own age.
Everybody would have described my dad as the authentic, real deal.
Yes,
yeah.
For sure. And so that just kind of stuck with me as days passed after that sermon, and I don't know, I think it just
sort of had the wheel spinning and thinking about how this is something we all need in our lives, to learn how to be not just better at relating to people, here are 5 steps to doing that, to being a nicer person. It's not about that at all. And it's hard. And, we all fail. I think of how I could tell stories and stories, but I would be bawling if I told you.
I'm going to ask you to tell all those
please.
stories.
Thank you. Okay. I'm going to leave now.
All your own relational failures.
Yes. Yes, you first.
I got my stories. I got my stories too. So, if you ask most, I want to ask you this question. If you ask most people, how many of these kind of really authentic and connected relationships do you have? And if you ask people, do you think these are easy to find? What do you think people would say?
It's kind of a trick question. I think that some people would say, oh yeah, it's easy, but they might be people that mistakenly think they have a lot of deep relationships. But I think if you're pretty real and honest with yourself, I think you would say not as many as I want to have.
I think that's true too. And so that makes these conversations important. I think this is something that I think this is one of those topics that people think about a lot inside as they go through their relationships, but they aren't necessarily having a lot of conversation about it. Like, you're not, sitting down with people all the time and saying, hey, I really don't have as many kind of authentic, real, open relationships as I'd like. What's up with that? How do I get there? It's not necessarily what we're putting on the table. So what do you think? Can you talk about one or two things, just examples that you think are things that keep us from cultivating more authentic and connected relationships with each other?
I can think of a couple off the top of my head. One is just time, the busyness of our life, of our culture. I can look around this room and see so many lovely people that I wish that I could cultivate deeper relationships with, that I could spend more time with, that I could get to know them better, but life is crazy and, that's hard to do.
What else?
I would say the other thing that prevents us is our own fears. The biggest thing, our own fears and insecurities prevent us from pushing through and really striving to have deeper relationships. But that's there's a lot to that.
There's a lot to that. The fear doesn't just generate one kind of response or approach in relationships. It actually feeds all kinds of things in relationships. And again, I think that people don't have a lot of conversations about that except in their own head. And so maybe it's good for us to name some of those fears and the things that they lead to and say, hey, does this ever happen to you? And how can you deal with that fear? And what would the Lord, how can our journey with the Lord help us to deal with that or come at it in a different way?
Yeah. One thing I was just thinking of, and maybe I'm skipping ahead or something. I have had people in my life, and maybe you all have too, who you thought that you were going to have a friendship with them and that your relationship was getting closer. And I don't know, we kind of called them like push and pull people. People who will one day, in the depths of despair, they will spill their guts to you and be very open and vulnerable. And you think, wow, we've really gotten someplace in our relationship. We're much closer than we were. I know this person better.
As she talks about this, understand, you either know this person she's describing,
or you are this person
she's describing.
And so you're excited about this, and the next time you see them, it's like a door has been slammed in your face, and like they never said what they said to you, like they
never opened up, they never got vulnerable with you.
Yeah,
push and pull.
Yeah, and that comes from their own fear, like, oh shoot, I shouldn't have said that. Now I'm going to be judged.
Yeah.
They're going to think I'm not as good, holy, far along the journey, wise, smart, fill in the blank, as they might have thought I was before they knew this stuff about me. So I'm going to pretend I didn't say that, and I'm going to pretend that I'm this together person that they thought I was before. Right.
And that moment of vulnerability never happened.
Yep.
Never happened.
Yep.
Nothing to see here, And I think that a lot of times, and where that comes from, that's a great example, because where that comes from, again, is it's coming from someplace inside, right? Like maybe I opened up to you, and then the next time I see you, I'm kind of feeling regretful or afraid because I opened up to you, and so I put the wall back up. That's coming from those fears inside. And that's the thing, is that if you were the best you could be at offering the right things, right? That's why we called this series, These Things I Bring, right? If you were the best you could be at offering the things that contribute to authentic relationship, doesn't mean you would get that with everybody, right? Because you're not in control of other people's fears and walls and preferences and whatever else. Doesn't mean you would get that with everybody. But our tendency, when we are feeling discouraged that we don't have many of these kinds of relationships, our tendency is to look around and say, what's wrong with all these people that they're not offering me this kind of relationship?
We like to say the common denominator is you.
Yeah, right. Right, and
Yeah.
that's not a sort of blame judgy statement. It's just,
all of us. Yeah.
like I've seen people get mad about something and walk away from a whole host of relationships in their life. And Linda and I have this saying we've probably said for 30 years, which is the problem is wherever you go, there you will be, right? You take you with you. And so it's easy, that's a good way to put it. It's easy to look around and say, what's wrong with all these people that they're not offering me better relationship? As Larry Crabb would have said, a better quality of relationship. But it's harder to say, to what degree am I able to offer the things that engender, invite, cultivate, authentic and connected relationship? I like this verse in Proverbs 20, verse 6. This is hard without a podium to manage all these things. Yeah, we need a coffee table here. That's what we need, like it's a television set. Yeah. Proverbs 20, verse 6 says, everyone proclaims their own goodness, but a man of steadfastness who can find? And I thought that's such a relevant statement and question, like that's what I was just saying. Everyone says, well, I know what I'm offering is okay, right? Everyone proclaims their own goodness. I know I'm a good person, and I'm offering the right things in relationship. But then the writer of the Proverbs says, but a man of steadfastness, who can really find, and it's easy for us to not ask that question of ourselves, like I was saying, but to look around and say, why aren't all these other people more steadfast? And when I looked up this verse again, because I remember that verse, I'm like, it's probably in Proverbs, I don't know where it is. So I went to my best friend Google. You can do that with Bible verses, right? Google knows the Bible really well. Seriously, I don't know if you know that. You just put in part of a verse you remember and you go, Proverbs 20, verse 6. So when I looked it up and I went to look at it again, because I couldn't remember where it was, I discovered that it comes right after a verse I learned in 1991. Because I am that old. And it's been, I'm a lot older than that. And it's a verse that's actually been, the verse before it is a verse that's been at the core of my thinking about the Christian journey ever since 1991. Every now and then you learn a passage of scripture and it just goes, boom, all the way into your heart. You go, I will hold on to that for the rest of my life. So Proverbs 26 says, every person proclaims their own goodness, but a man of steadfastness who can find? But listen to verse 5 that comes right before it. Verse 5 says, the purposes of a man's heart are like deep waters, but a man of understanding draws them out. And then he goes on to say, everyone proclaims his own goodness, but a man of steadfastness who can find? I think there's a connection between those two thoughts, that if I want to become a person of steadfastness, a person who can invite, engender, cultivate really authentic and good relationship with people, then I'm going to have to become that person who draws out the purposes of my heart. I have to understand my fears and my motives and my ruts that I've gotten into in life in the way I relate to people that might, put other people off in relation, all this stuff. And I just thought that was fascinating because that's been, I was in 30 plus years ago, Linda and I were in kind of pretty legalistic Christianity, so everything was about how you behaved. And then I went to this seminar with Larry Crabb, this Christian psychologist, and he taught me Proverbs 20, verse 5, and he started to talk about what's in the heart, and then he started to show me all the places where Jesus talks about the heart that I somehow was reading and not hearing. And I was like, oh my gosh, like we're playing up here. His analogy was always the iceberg, that life is like this iceberg, and what you see is above, remember that, Larry? What you see is above the waterline, and that's what's bouncing off. Everybody's bouncing off each other above the waterline. But what's moving your iceberg, the iceberg of your life, is what's below the waterline. And I started to look below the waterline in my own life and try to figure out those purposes and motives and desires and fears and longings and whatever. Oh,
that part is so fun.
I hated it. And maybe we should warn people about this series in that way. Like literally in about 1991, which was just a couple years before we planted this church, I started to say to the Lord, well, if there's a bunch of stuff in my heart that I don't really understand or see, I need you to start showing that stuff to me. Help me see what I'm blind to. Like David prays in Psalm 51, search me, O God, and see if there is any wicked or evil way in me. Show me my heart, because I can't always see it, right? Oh, Lord, that's a terrible prayer to pray, because I started to see, that like a lot of my motives toward Linda were really selfish. And I'm like, oh, you're a rat, man, And I started to see like that a lot of my strong Christianity that I was laying on people, the way I preached to people, the way I tried to win all the Bible and theological arguments with people, that it was really just posturing because I needed to feel important. But I never saw that motive. Then I started to see that motive, and I started to see how it actually hurt some of my friendships. And I'm like, man, this is some ugly stuff, And it's become I think it's just core to the Christian journey. Like there was I'm getting off track, but that's life. There was a guy who was a leader in the church we used to go to, who used to always say that all Christian psychology, all understanding of the human person had nothing to do with it. This is just about doing what God says. That's what the Christian life is about, blah, blah. But I realized something different. That God awareness and understanding and self-awareness and understanding go hand in hand. If you aren't aware of yourself, you are never going to really grow and change as a human person. And anyway, so that's been a big deal for me. So I think another way to say it is just that a lot of the stuff we haven't figured out about relationships is stuff that we haven't figured out about ourselves. So that's the question. How do we become people of authentic relationship? But I have another question for you, because we're having this conversation in church, right? We're not having this on a street corner at the neighborhood block party. We're having this conversation in church, and most of us in this room would say, yep, I'm a Christian, I'm a follower of Jesus. So my question to you is this: are Christians naturally better at this stuff, at knowing their own hearts, like their fears and their motives, and doing relationship in healthy, authentic ways? Another way I could ask this is this: when you become a Christian, does it just automatically happen that because you have God in your life, you kind of automatically become a person who knows how to offer authentic relationship? Kind of like, check, case closed, yep, Christian, got all the relationship, I got it all figured out.
Yes, absolutely.
And there are twinkling eyes.
Yes. No. And I think it takes...
So why doesn't it? Isn't God supposed to just come in and hit me with a magic wand and make me a heart-healthy, not in the eat your oats sense, but a heart-healthy, relationally healthy person? Isn't that what's supposed to happen?
That's such a... I don't know. There could be a really long answer for that. A Fran-length answer. I think some of us are more used to looking inside and thinking, comfortable with our own thoughts, and others are not. That's not going to automatically change when you become a Christian, but if you want to go there, you have to do something more than just look at Bible verses and say, oh yeah, that's a good one, I should try that. You have to always start with yourself. And looking inside, and I don't know, I feel like as the years have passed in my relationship with the Lord, one thing I've discovered, and that means so much to me, is that He never lets us just stay, in the same place forever. If we are wanting to continue on the journey with Him and go deeper with Him, He's always bringing us along, and then if we say, okay, what's next? He reveals that to us.
We say, what's next?
What's next?
And He says, well, since you asked.
Yes, I have this, and this. Let's start here.
I have some other things I want to.
Yeah.
And by the way, we're not sitting up here saying because self-awareness became important to us a long time ago. Yeah. We're not saying oh, we've taken this journey, we've arrived, now we're going to tell you. We are works in progress. But one of the things we've seen when we talk about Christians and this stuff is, and maybe have experienced it in a more acute way because of being pastors, is in church, one of the things, I believe that part of the purpose of the community of Jesus is that I believe we are, this is one of my favorite phrases that I came up with for the church, descriptors. We are the community of the new humanity. So this is the place where we practice at this, where we try to let God make us more whole and make us better. And that's why it's important for us to walk together for a long time. and not just say, I'll go to that church for 3 months and that church for 3 months, is that we need to journey together and we need to learn how we do this thing together. And so one of the things that we've seen is that in church, people's fears and unhealthy ways that they've learned to do relationship come out sometimes with each other. And then sometimes as a pastor, you step into that to try to be helpful, and sometimes it works, and sometimes, more bullets get fired. And so it's very, so we've seen a lot of that, and sometimes what people do is they say, because we've challenged people, I've challenged people and said, I think you need to, I've had people come to me, this is a good example, and say, I have this big problem with somebody in church. We've had this conflict, we disagree on this thing, he or she said these things that hurt me or that I don't agree with, and I really think what I should do is I should just leave. So here's a really good question. I wonder what Jesus would say. If he would say, yeah, you should write that person off and leave and not deal with it. Or if Jesus would say, wow, what an opportunity to try to figure out how to do authentic relationship and keep connection and work things through. Anyway, the point is it's not automatic, is it?
No, and I'm thinking back to early on in our faith and early on in our church experience. I feel like we had a very shallow view of relationships and of people. And I think, I don't know if any of you can relate to this, but you look at a person and you just meet them and you sort of just categorize them. Oh, they're this kind of a person or that kind of a person. And, they may be a struggling person. And at some point in our Christianity, we started to ask ourselves, I wonder about that person. I wonder what happened in their life to make them the kind of person they are, to make them the struggling person they are, to make them the person who can't be vulnerable or the person who can't sustain a good relationship for whatever reason. And we started to, I don't know if this sounds like light or frivolous, I don't mean it that way. We started to care about what was inside of people. And I think that's biblical.
Right.
That's God, saying these people are all my creation.
Yeah.
No matter how easy or difficult they are for you to relate to or get along with, they are my children. And we have to be willing to see them that way, to try and see them with God's eyes, and to try and love them. I mean, to the degree that we can. Obviously, we can't love the way God does, but we should work on it.
And we'll probably talk about this at some point in this series, that because you'll be up here with me every week. That's why I said we.
Are you serious?
I don't know. But
can I have a more comfortable stool? Because this is horrible.
we'll take an offering for a better.
It's being short.
We'll take an offering for a better stool.
Oh my gosh.
What I was going to say is that when you get curious about people, it increases your compassion. And we've talked about this with friends, with parents, with siblings, some of my siblings and your siblings. And when you understand things people have been through, then you look and you go, I understand the hurt they experienced here, the way they were wounded here, and it increases your compassion and your understanding. So when the Bible talks about being long-suffering with one another, being patient, being compassionate, that has to increase. If those qualities don't increase in us, we're going to jettison people quickly as we realize, they got this issue, we can't connect. Okay, that's done. So, and here's the thing. We do have, as Christians, we have a leg up. Say, Christians aren't automatically any better at this. But we have a leg up on the rest of the world. And that is that we have some place that we can look to ask, what does this look like in a human life? We don't just have the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle that we're trying to sort out. We have the picture on the box, and his name is Jesus. And we read the Gospels. He's healthy. He's not so hampered by his internal fears and wounds that it's screwing up his attempts to offer people good and authentic relationship. So we have somewhere to look, And then Jesus, of course, in the Gospel, he talks to us about about this. He talks to us about love. And this is going to be the third time in about a month or a month and a half that I've read this passage to you. But I don't regret doing that as your pastor. Because I think sometimes when you hear it, and you hear it, and you hear it, it starts to sink in. So this is what Jesus says in the upper room around the Passover table, the night he was betrayed. He says, as the Father loved me, this is John 15, I also have loved you. Remain in my love. If you keep my commandments, you will remain in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and remain in his love. These things I have spoken to you, that my joy may remain in you and that your joy may be full. You hear again, I keep reminding you that link between love and this deep thing the Bible calls joy, that your joy may be full. This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, than he lays down his life for his friends. You are my friends if you do whatever I command you. I used to hear that last sentence differently than I do now. You are my, like telling your kids, you're my kid if you do exactly what I say, right? That sounds kind of like very conditional, right? Jesus is saying, when he says, you're my friends if you do what I've commanded you, friends, right? We're a community of friends here. He's saying, you're part of my community. You're with me. You're part of my circle if you live in this way of love that I've been talking about, because that's what defines this community that we're in together. He's saying, so if you will value these things, love, the relationship you offer other people, if you will value that and pursue that, then you're really part of my thing. You're really part of my community. You're part of where this is all going. So, but I want to say this, that we're okay. I want to say this. It's very easy for us as Christians, especially as Christians, to talk about love and kind of religiousize, it's not really a word, it's my word, kind of religiosize our ideas about love. And we say, oh yes, we're Christians and Jesus taught us about love and we're supposed to love. But when we do that, when we kind of religiousize it, we may fall into, and often do fall into, treating the question of love or the topic of love more as a sacred topic, what we think of as something sacred in that religious sort of way. It is sacred. Obviously, love is sacred. But we think of it as more as a religious sacred thing than being a human topic. But love, we're talking about everything that goes on between human beings when we start talking about love. And if you know from your own life, think about your own relationships. A lot of ins and outs to your relationships with the people that are in your life. So with sacred topics, we often think that our job is to revere them and then stop there. Like, it's easy to say, oh yeah, Jesus taught us to love. We should be loving. And all the Christians say amen and we all go have lunch. As if like somehow that did it. Like we accomplished it because we revered it. And revering it and accomplishing it are two different things. But love and relationship, these are very human. They have a lot of ins and outs, longings, fears, motives, experiences. So we can't just revere the idea of love. We have to understand what's in the way of it. We have to get a vision for it, understand what's in the way of it, begin to try to find our feet at living it out and unpack it. And I think that's what Paul tries to do in 1 Corinthians 13. And we're going to launch off these verses, off these words a few times throughout this series. And I've dug around. I know you've heard these verses. You hear this passage at almost every wedding you go to, right? Which I think is wonderful because it's the best description I've ever heard of the nature of real love. But I've dug around in the Greek a little bit, and I've done what I call a translation of these verses in 1 Corinthians 13, which I think you'll find intriguing. So I just want you to listen to this. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love is not envious. It does not brag. It does not make itself big. Love does not put people down or talk down to people. It doesn't always ask, how does this work out for me? It does not get angry easily, and it doesn't hold a grudge. Love does not get happy about the downfall or problems of other people, but has great joy when truth sets things right. Love keeps a confidence and protects people. It believes in what people can become and sticks it out with people. Love will never stop being the most important thing. That last sentence I thought was really interesting because you know it in your Bible by these words, love never fails. But the word fails in Greek is the Greek source of our word for something to lapse. Like when your insurance policy lapses or a law that has a time date on it, you say, well, that law lapsed and came to an end. So what Paul really says is love is never going to lapse. It's never going to stop being the most important thing. So what we want to do with this series is kind of say, what is love when we render it as authentic relationship? What do we need to see and how do we do it like really, really, really? Not because we're going to get perfect at it, but because we want to be like Jesus and make progress with it and become more whole people who are able to, as I've been saying, invite, engender, cultivate these more authentic and connected relationships. And here's the thing. This has, do you know the word serendipity? When something is serendipitous? It's not the thing you went looking for directly, but because of the journey you went on, you found it. So here's the serendipitous nature of becoming people of authentic relationship. That you won't necessarily find it with everybody or even everybody that you want it with, but as you become a person capable of offering people the things that contribute to more authentic relationship, you'll end up having more of these authentic and connected relationships because on your part, you're offering, engendering, inviting, cultivating in the right ways. And so in the end, in a roundabout way, you get more of what you were originally looking for in relationships. And really, that's a gospel thought. It's kind of backwards from what we think a lot of times. The very dispositions that we avoid a lot of times in relationships because they seem weak or foolish turn out to be the places that we actually need to go inside ourselves and with other people that actually make more authentic, closer, more fulfilling relationships possible. And so that's what we're going to talk about over the weeks ahead. And one of the writings which captures that so well is the prayer of St. Francis. And I think it's a good place to close out this little intro this morning to these things I bring to this series on relationships. And the words to it are going to be up on the screen. There you go. And I was wondering, babe, if you would lead us in it. You know this prayer. And if you would like to, you could pray this out loud with us. It's a great prayer this morning. So,
Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. Where there is sadness, joy. O divine Master, grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive, it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, and it is in dying that we are born to eternal life. Amen.
Hey, put your hands together for my partners, will you?